The bell above the door of the midnight griddle didn't just jingle. It shivered, reacting to the gust of freezing wind that tore through the entrance. Outside, the world was a blur of charcoal clouds and relentless sleet, but inside, the air instantly grew heavy, charged with the scent of ozone, wet pine, and raw predatory power. They walked in like a storm taking human shape, 6 of them moving with a fluid, synchronized grace that made the hair on Lorelai Crestmore's arms stand straight up. But her eyes didn't linger on the man at the front, the terrifying alpha with eyes like shattered amber. They went to the boy trailing 5 steps behind him, the one looking at the floor, invisible to everyone else, carrying a silence so loud it drowned out the storm. The diner was usually a sanctuary for long-haul truckers and insomniacs, a place where the coffee was hot enough to burn away the regret of the night before. Tonight, however, it felt like a hunting ground. Lorelai wiped the counter, her movements mechanical, but her senses were dialed high. She had worked at the edge of the shifter territories long enough to know the signs, the way the other patrons instinctively hunched over their plates, making themselves small, the way the air pressure seemed to drop. Benedict Farrowmere. She knew the name, though she had never seen the face. He was the Alpha King of the Northern Valleys, a ruler whispered about in tones of reverence and terror. He was massive, his broad shoulders stretching the fabric of his dark peacoat. His jaw was set in a permanent line of grim authority, and when he slid into the largest booth, the red vinyl creaked in protest. 3 men and a woman sat with him, his guard, his court. They were loud, laughing with sharp canorous barks, slapping the table, demanding menus without saying a word. And then there was the boy. He couldn't have been more than 7. He was pale, with messy dark hair that fell into eyes the color of rain-washed slate. He stood at the edge of the booth, hesitating. The woman, a sharp-featured blonde named Sabine, didn't scoot over. She didn't even look at him. She just laughed at something the man next to her, Aldrich, said, effectively blocking the boy's path. Benedict, the alpha, was busy looking at a map spread out on the table. He didn't look up. He didn't make room. The boy, Silas, stood there for a long, humiliating minute. Then, resigning himself to the invisible rules of this pack, he walked to the counter, pulling himself up onto a stool 3 seats away from Lorelai's station. Lorelai watched him. She saw the way his hands gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. He didn't fidget. He was perfectly, unnaturally still. "Vanessa," Lorelai whispered to her co-worker, who was trembling by the coffee machine. "Go take the big table. I've got the counter." Vanessa looked like she might faint. "That's Farrowmere. If I spill coffee on him, I'm dead. Just breathe. Put the mugs down. Don't make eye contact. Go." Lorelai smoothed her apron and walked toward the boy. Up close, he smelled of cold air and loneliness. He was staring at the pie display case, his eyes tracing the meringue peaks of the lemon pie. "Hey," she said softly. He didn't react. He didn't blink. It was as if he hadn't heard her. Lorelai frowned slightly. She tapped the counter, the vibration causing him to jump. He looked up, fear flashing in those gray eyes, a primal, prey-like fear that broke her heart. She realized then, it wasn't that he was ignoring her. Lorelai glanced at the booth. The wolves were devouring their steaks, oblivious. Benedict was speaking in low, rumbling tones about border disputes. Not once did he look toward the counter. Lorelai turned back to the boy. She took a breath, centered herself, and lifted her hands. "Are you hungry?" She signed, her movements fluid and precise. The reaction was instantaneous. Silas froze. His eyes widened, losing that dull, glazed look. He stared at her hands, then up at her face, searching for a trick. Lorelai smiled, a small, genuine thing that didn't reach her voice but lived in her fingers. "I can get you pie," she signed. "Lemon or chocolate?" Silas's mouth opened slightly. His hands, small and trembling, lifted from the counter. His movements were jerky, unpracticed, but readable. "Lemon," he signed back. "Please." Lorelai felt a lump form in her throat. She nodded, coming right up. She cut a massive slice, sliding it onto a plate. She poured a glass of milk. When she placed it in front of him, he didn't eat immediately. He looked at her again, his hands moving rapidly now. "Why do you speak with hands?" Lorelai paused. She signed back. "My brother was like you. He liked the quiet." It was a half-truth, a painful memory she kept locked away, but it was enough. Silas picked up his fork, and for the first time, his shoulders dropped. He took a bite, closing his eyes. Lorelai turned to refill the sugar dispensers, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. Then the silence hit. It wasn't the quiet of the empty diner. It was a vacuum. The laughter at the booth had stopped. The clatter of silverware had ceased. Lorelai turned around slowly. Benedict Farrowmere was standing up. He was even larger standing than sitting. He loomed over the diner, his presence filling every corner. But his eyes weren't on his guards. They were locked on Lorelai. They burned with an intensity that made her knees weak, glowing with a bioluminescent gold that signaled the wolf was close to the surface. The diner held its breath. Benedict walked toward the counter, his boots heavy on the linoleum. Thud, thud, thud. He stopped right behind Silas. The boy froze, the fork halfway to his mouth. Silas didn't turn around, he just shrank, trying to make himself disappear. Benedict placed a hand on the counter, boxing the boy in, but not touching him. He leaned forward, bringing his face level with Lorelai's. She could smell sandalwood, rain, and the metallic tang of suppressed violence. "What?" Benedict rumbled, his voice like gravel grinding together. "Did you just do?" Lorelai gripped her notepad, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But she didn't look away. She couldn't. "I asked him if he wanted pie," she said, her voice steady despite the fear. Benedict's eyes narrowed. He glanced down at Silas, then back at her. "He does not speak." "No," Lorelai agreed. "He doesn't speak. That doesn't mean he has nothing to say." A gasp came from the booth. Sabine had covered her mouth. No one spoke back to the Alpha King. Benedict stared at her, searching for submission, for fear. He found the fear, certainly, but he didn't find the submission. He found a fierce, quiet protectiveness that mirrored the storm outside. He looked down at his son. Silas was trembling, but he was also eating. He was eating the pie, looking at Lorelai with something that looked dangerously like hope. Benedict looked back at Lorelai, and the gold in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a dark, calculating intelligence. "What is your name?" "Lorelai." "Finish your shift, Lorelai," Benedict said, the command vibrating in the air. "We need to talk." The rest of the shift passed in a blur of agonizing tension. The pack didn't leave. They lingered over coffee they didn't drink, their eyes following Lorelai every time she moved. Vanessa had locked herself in the supply closet, feigning a restocking emergency, leaving Lorelai alone on the floor. Silas had finished his pie. He sat quietly, drawing patterns in the condensation on his water glass. Every now and then, he would glance at Lorelai, and she would send him a quick, discreet sign, good or more milk. He would respond with a tiny nod or a shy sign. It was a secret conversation, a thread of connection spun right under the nose of the most powerful predator in the north. When the clock finally struck midnight, Lorelai untied her apron. Her hands were shaking. She tossed the apron into the hamper and grabbed her coat, a thin wool thing that had seen better days. She walked out the back door, hoping against hope that she could slip away. Her old sedan was parked under the flickering sodium light of the alley. He was waiting for her. Benedict was leaning against the hood of her car, arms crossed over his chest. The rain was coming down in sheets now, soaking his dark hair, plastering it to his forehead. He didn't seem to notice the cold. Steam rose faintly from his shoulders. His body heat was unnatural. "You tried to run," he stated. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "I'm trying to go home," Lorelai said, clutching her keys like a weapon. "I didn't break any laws. I served a customer." "You spoke to my son." Benedict pushed off the car and took a step toward her. The alley felt suddenly very small. Silas has not communicated with a single soul in 3 years, not since his mother died. The grief in his voice was blink and you miss it, buried under layers of granite, but Lorelai heard it. "He knows sign language," Lorelai said, water dripping from her nose. "Someone taught him. His mother did. Before the end." Benedict looked away, staring into the dark mouth of the alley. He stopped speaking the day she passed. The healers say his voice is gone. The pack says he is broken. A wolf who cannot howl cannot lead. He is weak in their eyes. "He's a child," Lorelai snapped. The anger flared before she could check it. "He's just a little boy surrounded by people who treat him like furniture because he's inconvenient." Benedict's head snapped back to her. A growl ripped through his chest, low and vibrating. "Careful." "Or what?" Lorelai stepped forward, driven by an exhaustion that outweighed her self-preservation. "You'll hurt me for feeding him?" You're the Alpha King. You're supposed to be all-powerful, but you sat there and let your friends ignore him. You let him starve for attention." Benedict moved faster than human eyesight could track. In a heartbeat, he was in front of her, his hand slamming onto the roof of the car beside her head, boxing her in. His face was inches from hers. His breath was hot on her chilled skin. She could see the flecks of green in his amber eyes, the rugged topography of scars along his jawline. "I do not let him starve," Benedict whispered, his voice ragged. "I protect him. By keeping him silent, I keep him alive. If he tries to lead and fails, the laws demand a challenge. He would be torn apart." Lorelai's breath hitched. She saw it then, the desperation behind the monster. He wasn't ignoring Silas out of cruelty. He was hiding him. He was trying to make him small so the wolves wouldn't eat him. "That's not living," she whispered. "That's just surviving." Benedict stared at her, the rain running down his face like tears he refused to shed. He looked at her hands, the hands that had spoken to his son. "I cannot learn it," he admitted, the confession torn from him. "My hands, they turn to claws too easily. I lack the patience, the delicacy. And the others, they mock what they do not understand." He pulled back, giving her space. "Come with us," he said. Lorelai blinked. "What?" "Come to Blackwood Manor. Be his tutor, his companion, whatever you call it." "You want me to be a nanny for the Wolf King's son?" Lorelai laughed nervously. "I have a job. I have a lease. I will buy the diner and burn it down if that's what it takes to free you from your shift," Benedict said, dead serious. "I will pay you 10 times what you make here. You will have a suite of your own. You will have protection." He reached into his coat and pulled out a card, thick and black with silver embossing. "He smiled tonight," Benedict said softly, "when you gave him that pie. He hasn't smiled in 3 years. Lorelai looked at the card, then back at the looming figure of the Alpha. She thought of her empty apartment, the heating bill she couldn't pay, the loneliness of her own life since her brother passed. But mostly, she thought of the gray eyes of the boy, looking at her hands as if they held the secrets of the universe. "I have conditions," she said. Benedict's lips quirked upward, a ghost of a smirk. "I would expect nothing less." The drive to Blackwood Manor took 2 hours, winding up through the treacherous mountain passes where the pines grew so thick they blotted out the moon. Lorelai sat in the back of a sleek armored SUV. Silas sat next to her. He had fallen asleep 10 minutes into the ride, his head lolling until it rested against her shoulder. Lorelai had stiffened at first, waiting for a reprimand from the front seat where Benedict drove, but the king had merely glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. When they finally broke through the tree line, the estate revealed itself. It wasn't a house, it was a fortress, carved from black stone rising out of the snow like a jagged tooth. It was beautiful, severe, and utterly terrifying. The car stopped in a circular courtyard. The rain had turned to soft, silent snow here at the higher elevation. Benedict opened her door. "Welcome to Blackwood." Lorelai stepped out, shivering. The cold here was different, sharper, biting deep into the bone. Silas woke up, rubbing his eyes. When he saw the house, his shoulders hunched. He looked at Lorelai, then quickly signed, "Home." The sign for home usually involved bringing the fingers to the cheek, a warm gesture. Silas did it with a heavy resignation that made it look like prison. They entered the grand foyer. It was cavernous, lit by iron chandeliers holding real fire. The shadows stretched long and dancing across the stone floors. "Benedict!" The voice was sharp, echoing off the walls. Aldrich, the man from the diner, strode in from the library, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. Sabine followed him, looking like an ice queen in cashmere. "You brought the Aldrich sneered, sniffing the air. "The house smells like grease and cheap soap." Lorelai stiffened, but she felt a small hand slip into hers. Silas was standing beside her, gripping her fingers. It was a claim. "She is mine." Benedict stepped between them and his court. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Lorelai is a guest," Benedict rumbled. "She is under my protection. If you disrespect her, you disrespect me, and you know what happens then, Aldrich." Aldrich's lip curled, revealing the flash of a canine. "We are preparing for the winter solstice, Alpha. The council will be here. Is it wise to have a stray in the house when the elders judge the boy's fitness?" "The boy," Lorelai said, her voice ringing clear in the stone hall. Has a name. Aldrich turned his gaze on her, amused and predatory. And it has a voice? How quaint. Enough, Benedict commanded. Sabine, show Lorelai to the east wing, the blue room. Sabine's eyes widened. The blue room? That's next to the nursery. That is, family quarters. Did I stutter? Benedict's voice dropped to that subsonic growl that vibrated in the floorboards. No, Alpha, Sabine said, dipping her head. Though her eyes promised retribution, she gestured to the stairs. This way. Lorelai squeezed Silas's hand. I'll see you tomorrow, she signed. Silas looked at his father, then back at her. He didn't want to let go, but Benedict stepped forward, placing a massive hand on Silas's shoulder. It was meant to be comforting, Lorelai thought, but Silas flinched. Go to bed, son, Benedict said. Lorelai followed Sabine up the grand staircase. The portrait gallery was lined with faces of grim men and women, Farrowmere ancestors. They all looked strong, loud, violent. You won't last a week, Sabine said pleasantly as they reached the landing. She didn't look back. Benedict thinks he can fix the boy, but you can't fix what is born broken. Silas is a runt. In the wild, we would have left him in the snow years ago. Lorelai stopped walking. It must be exhausting, she said. Sabine turned, raising an eyebrow. What? Being so afraid of a little boy that you have to bully him to feel strong? Sabine's face contorted, her beauty twisting into something feral. She took a step toward Lorelai, her nails lengthening into claws. You are a pet, Sabine hissed, here for the Alpha's amusement. Do not mistake his pity for power. Lorelai held her ground, though her heart was hammering. I'm not here for the Alpha. She walked past the she-wolf and opened the door to the blue room. Inside, it was luxurious, velvet drapes, a four-poster bed, a roaring fire. But Lorelai moved straight to the window. She looked down into the courtyard. Benedict was still standing there, in the falling snow, looking up at her window. He hadn't moved. He raised a hand, not a wave, but an acknowledgement. Lorelai placed her hand against the cold glass. She had entered the wolf's den, and she realized with a jolt of terrifying clarity that the danger wasn't just the teeth and claws. The danger was the way the Alpha King looked at her, like she was the first sunrise he had seen in 1,000 years. And the danger was the boy down the hall, whose silence held secrets that could bring this whole stone fortress crashing down. She was trapped, but for the first time in her life she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. As Lorelai turns from the window, she notices a small piece of paper slid under her door. It's a drawing, a crude crayon sketch of a wolf with its mouth sewn shut, and a stick figure woman holding a pair of scissors. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, are the words, "Help him." The morning sun at Blackwood Manor did not rise. It bled through the gray clouds, bruising the sky with streaks of violent violet and cold iron. Lorelai woke to the silence of the mountain, a silence so profound it felt heavy, pressing against her eardrums. She dressed quickly in the clothes she had packed, sensible jeans and a thick sweater, but they felt woefully inadequate against the draft that ghosted through the stone corridors. With the crayon drawing tucked safely into her pocket, she ventured out of the blue room. The manor was a labyrinth of shadows and mahogany. She found Silas not in the nursery, but in the library, a cavernous room 2 stories high, filled with the scent of decaying paper and lemon polish. He was sitting under a massive oak table, a fortress of solitude, surrounded by books he wasn't reading. He was building a tower out of them. Lorelai didn't call out. She walked softly, her sneakers making no sound on the Persian rugs. She crouched down near the table, knocking on the floorboards. Knock, knock. Silas flinched, knocking over his tower. When he saw it was her, his shoulders loosened, but he didn't smile. He looked at the door, checking for others. Safe, Lorelai signed. She made the motion for safe, crossed fists breaking away from each other, slowly, deliberately. Silas mimicked her, his small fingers fumbling. Safe? Yes, she signed. Hungry? He shook his head. He reached for a book, an encyclopedia of flora, and opened it to a page showing poisonous berries. He pointed to the berries, then to his throat. Lorelai's heart seized. No, she signed, sharp and fast. Bad. Silas stared at her, his expression unreadably ancient for a 7-year-old. He moved his hands, forming a shape she recognized from the night before. Quiet. You don't have to be quiet with me, Lorelai signed. She sat on the floor, crossing her legs. We are going to make a new sound, a loud one. She spent the next 3 hours there, hidden beneath the table with the Wolf King's son. She didn't teach him the alphabet or grammar. She taught him power. She taught him the sign for stop, for no, for mine. Silas was a sponge. His dexterity, honed by years of silence and observation, was incredible. He learned to snap his fingers to get her attention. He learned to stomp his foot when he signed angry, adding a physical percussion to the silent word. They were practicing the sign for wolf, an open hand moving away from the face like a snout, when the heavy library doors creaked open. Silas froze, reverting instantly to the statue-like state he had inhabited at the diner. Lorelai turned, her body instinctively shifting to shield the boy. Benedict stood in the doorway. He wasn't wearing his heavy coat today. He was in a white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and mapped with faint silver scars. He held a silver tray with a teapot and sandwiches. He looked at the scene, the human woman and his son, huddled under a table like conspirators. "I was told," Benedict said, his voice rumbling through the room, "that the staff could not find you. I assumed you had run away." "I told you," Lorelai said, crawling out from under the table and dusting off her knees. "I don't run." Benedict's gaze drifted to Silas. The boy stayed under the table, eyes wide. "He missed breakfast," Benedict noted. He walked over and set the tray on a low reading desk. "And so did you." "We were busy." "Doing what?" Lorelai looked at Benedict. "Giving him weapons." Benedict's eyebrows pulled together. "There are no weapons in here." "Language is a weapon, Benedict." She used his name without an honorific, a slip of the tongue that made his eyes flare with something that wasn't anger. "He needs to be able to tell you when he's hurt, when he's scared, when he's hungry." Benedict stared at the tray. He picked up a cucumber sandwich, looking at it as if it were an alien object. "I know when he is hungry. I am his father." "Do you?" Lorelai challenged softly. "Do you know what his favorite color is? Do you know he hates the cold but won't tell you because he thinks it makes him weak?" Benedict went still. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. "Green," a small movement caught their eye. Silas had crawled out. He stood by Lorelai's leg, clutching her jeans. He looked at his father, his hands trembling, and signed, "Green." He pointed to the emerald spine of a book. "Favorite." Benedict looked at Lorelai, helpless. "What did he say?" "He said his favorite color is green," Lorelai whispered, her throat tight. Benedict looked at his son. He took a step forward, and for a second, he looked like he wanted to fall to his knees. Instead, he reached out a massive hand. Silas flinched, expecting a blow. Benedict froze, the pain flashing across his face so raw it felt intrusive to witness. He slowly, agonizingly, turned his hand over, palm up, an offering. "Green," Benedict repeated, his voice cracking, like the forest in summer. Silas looked at the hand, then at his father's face. He didn't take the hand, but he nodded. Once. It was a truce. Benedict straightened, clearing his throat, the alpha mask sliding back into place. "Eat, both of you. The council arrives in 2 days. I need him. I need him to be presentable." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. He didn't look back. "Teach me," he said to the wood of the doorframe, "the sign for proud." Lorelai blinked, tears pricking her eyes. She raised her hand, thumb moving up her chest. Proud. Benedict watched her reflection in the glass of a bookcase. He didn't attempt it. He just nodded and walked out, leaving the air charged with the scent of rain and regret. The peace of the library didn't last. By the next afternoon, the estate was swarming. The preparations for the solstice brought wolves from every corner of the territory, warriors with scars, elders with clouded eyes, and young pups who tumbled through the snow in rough play. Lorelai tried to keep Silas inside, but the noise drew him to the window. He watched the other children wrestling in the fresh powder, his breath fogging the glass. "Do you want to go out?" Lorelai asked. Silas hesitated, then signed, "Watch only." Lorelai bundled him into his coat and scarf. She put on her own boots, steeling herself. The courtyard was a chaotic scene of sparring matches and reunions. When Lorelai and Silas stepped out onto the terrace, a ripple of silence spread through the nearest groups. Noses twitched. Human. Sabine was in the center of the yard, overseeing the sparring of 2 teenage wolves. She looked up, her lips curling into a sneer. She whispered something to Aldrich, who was sharpening a blade on a whetstone nearby. Aldrich stood up. "Look who finally crawled out of his hole. Silas stiffened against Lorelai's side. "Leave him alone, Aldrich," Lorelai warned, her voice low. "I'm just greeting the prince," Aldrich said, walking over with a saunter that screamed arrogance. He stopped 5 feet away. "The elders are coming, boy. They're going to want to hear you howl. Can you do that, or are you still a broken toy?" Silas looked at his boots. "Look at me when I speak to you," Aldrich barked, a command laced with alpha power. Silas flinched violently, stepping backward. He slipped on a patch of ice. It happened in slow motion. Silas fell, his head cracking against the stone balustrade with a sickening thud. "Silas!" Lorelai screamed. She dropped to her knees. Blood was already blooming on the snow, bright red and terrifyingly fast. Silas was clutching his head, his mouth open in a silent scream of pain. Tears streamed down his face, but no sound came out. Aldrich laughed. "Clumsy. He can't even walk right." Lorelai didn't think. She didn't calculate the odds. Rage, hot and blinding, flooded her veins. She stood up, grabbed a handful of icy snow, and packed it hard. She hurled it directly into Aldrich's face. The impact was satisfyingly loud. Aldrich stumbled back, wiping the slush from his eyes. He growled, a sound that shifted from human to animal. His eyes flashed red. "You mistake your place, human," Aldrich snarled. He lunged. Lorelai threw herself over Silas, bracing for the teeth. They never came. A black blur collided with Aldrich mid-air. The sound of the impact shook the ground. A massive black wolf, easily the size of a pony, stood over Aldrich. Its fur was midnight dark, its eyes burning gold. It snarled, a sound so deep it vibrated in Lorelai's teeth. Benedict. He had shifted. The black wolf pinned Aldrich to the frozen ground, jaws clamped around Aldrich's throat, just enough to draw blood. Aldrich whined, submitting instantly, exposing his neck. The black wolf held him there for a long, terrifying minute, letting the pack see the dominance. Then, with a disgusted snort, he released him. Benedict didn't shift back immediately. He turned to Lorelai and Silas. The wolf's head was massive, terrifying, but when he lowered it to sniff Silas's bleeding wound, he was incredibly gentle. He nudged Silas's shoulder, a silent query. "Hurt?" Silas, eyes wide, reached out and buried his hands in the thick fur of his father's neck. He wasn't afraid. Lorelai, her heart hammering against her ribs, looked into the wolf's golden eyes. She saw the man inside, the terrifying, protective, desperate father. "He needs a doctor," she whispered. The wolf nodded. He crouched low, signaling for them to climb on. Lorelai lifted Silas onto the king's back, then climbed up behind him, wrapping her arms around the boy and burying her hands in Benedict's fur to hold on. He took off, not running, but moving with a swift, gliding gait toward the infirmary wing. Lorelai pressed her face into the warmth of his coat. She smelled the pine, the ozone, and the blood, and realized with a jolt that she had never felt safer than she did riding a monster through the snow. Later, after Silas was stitched up and sleeping, a concussion, but he would heal fast, the doctors said, Lorelai found Benedict in his study. He was human again, wearing a fresh shirt, pouring a drink with shaking hands. "You shifted," she said from the doorway, "in front of everyone." Benedict downed the amber liquid in one swallow. "He touched my son." "He didn't touch him." Silas slipped. "He caused the fear that made him slip." "It is the same." Benedict turned, his eyes still holding the golden glow of the wolf. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the dampness on her jeans where she had knelt in the snow, the fierce set of her jaw. "You shielded him," Benedict said quietly. "You put your body between an apex predator and my son. Why?" Lorelai walked into the room. The firelight danced on the walls. Because he couldn't ask for help. Benedict closed the distance between them. The air grew thick, electric. He reached out, his thumb grazing her cheekbone where a speck of dirt remained. His skin was scorching hot. "You are foolish, Lorelai," he murmured, his voice rough, brave but foolish. "Maybe," she whispered, leaning almost imperceptibly into his touch. "Or maybe I just know a good wolf when I see one." Benedict froze. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. The pull was magnetic, undeniable. Then he pulled back, his expression hardening. "The elders are here. They arrived while we were in the infirmary. They want to see Silas at dawn." The spell broke. The cold reality rushed back in. "He's not ready," Lorelai said. He has to be, Benedict said, turning to the window. Or they will take him. The great hall of Blackwood Manor was designed to intimidate. High vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow, and the walls were lined with the mounted skulls of ancient beasts. At the head of the room sat the council, 5 ancient wolves, their human forms withered but their eyes sharp with ageless power. The air smelled of judgment. Lorelai stood off to the side in the shadows of a pillar. She wasn't allowed in the center circle. That was for the pack. Benedict stood in the center, looking every inch the king. He wore formal robes of fur and leather, his posture rigid. Beside him stood Silas. The boy looked tiny. He had a bandage on his forehead, stark white against his pale skin. He wore a miniature version of his father's tunic. His hands were clasped behind his back, shaking. Benedict, the eldest council member, a woman with hair like cobwebs, spoke. Her voice was like dry leaves skittering on stone. We have heard troubling rumors that the heir is defective. Silas is strong, Benedict said, his voice echoing. He is intelligent. He is a Farrowmere. But he is silent, the elder countered. The wolf song is our bond. It is how we call to the moon, how we command the pack. A king who cannot howl is a king who cannot lead. There are other ways to lead, Benedict argued. Show us, another elder barked. Let the boy speak. Let him recite the oath of lineage. The room went deadly silent. The oath was ancient. It had to be spoken. Silas looked at the floor. He looked at his father. Benedict's jaw tightened. He looked ready to fight them all, to tear the room apart to save his son from this humiliation. He cannot, Sabine's voice cut through the silence. She stepped forward from the crowd. He is mute. He has been for years. Benedict hides it, but the pack knows. The boy is weak. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Weak. Broken. Runt. The elder looked at Benedict. Is this true? Benedict opened his mouth, but no sound came out. To admit it was to condemn him. To lie was impossible. Lorelai couldn't watch it anymore. She couldn't watch them crush him. She stepped out of the shadows. He is not mute, her voice rang out, surprising even herself. Every head turned. 500 wolves stared at the human waitress. Benedict's eyes widened in warning. Go back. Lorelai ignored him. She walked into the circle, the pressure of the alpha auras almost crushing her lungs. She stopped beside Silas and knelt, bringing herself to his eye level. He speaks, Lorelai said, looking at the elders. He speaks a language older than your howls. He speaks the language of the mind and the heart. The elders scoffed. A human trick? Hand-waving? Test him, Lorelai challenged. She stood up, placing a hand on Silas's shoulder. She felt him lean into her. Ask him anything. I will translate. You could be lying, Sabine spat. Then watch him, Lorelai said. Watch his eyes, watch his hands. Tell me he doesn't understand. The elder leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. Very well, boy. If you are to be king, what is the first duty of an alpha? Silas looked at Lorelai. She nodded, a microscopic movement. Show them. Silas took a deep breath. He stepped away from his father. He stepped away from Lorelai. He stood alone in the center of the circle. He raised his hands. The first duty, he signed, his movements sharp, stomping his foot for emphasis, is to protect. Lorelai translated, her voice steady. The first duty is to protect? Silas continued. To protect the pack. To protect the weak, he pointed to himself. To protect the silence. To protect the pack. To protect the weak. To protect the silence. The elders watched the boy's hands. They were mesmerizing, fluid, expressive, filled with a desperate, raw power. A king, Silas signed, his face fierce, does not need a loud voice. He needs a strong heart. He thumped his chest with a small fist. A king does not need a loud voice. He needs a strong heart. Silence descended on the hall. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness this time. It was the silence of awe. The elder woman sat back. She looked at Benedict, then at the boy. He has the spirit, she admitted slowly. But the law is the law. The oath must be heard. She stood up, leaning on a gnarled staff. Tomorrow night is the solstice, she declared. The moonstone will be brought out. Legend says the first alpha roared at the stone and it glowed with the light of the goddess. If the boy is truly meant to lead, he must make the stone glow. Benedict stepped forward. That requires a sonic vibration. A howl. You are setting him up to fail. If he cannot wake the stone, the elder said coldly. "Then he is not the heir. And you, Benedict, must choose a new successor. Or facing a challenge for the throne yourself." She pointed a withered finger at Silas. "Make the stone sing, little wolf, or be cast out." The elders depart, leaving the hall in stunned silence. As the crowd disperses, Silas turns to Lorelai. He doesn't sign. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small silver whistle, a dog whistle. He looks at it, then at the moonstone resting on the dais, and a look of terrifying determination crosses his face. He knows something they don't. The solstice night was not merely dark, it was a physical weight, a velvet shroud pulled tight over the snowy peaks of the Farrowmere estate. The air was thin and bitingly cold, smelling of pine resin and ancient magic. In the center of the open-air amphitheater stood the moonstone, a jagged spire of quartz that looked like a frozen piece of the moon itself. 500 wolves stood in a circle, their breath rising in white plumes. The silence was absolute. This was the night of judgment. Lorelai stood in the front row, her hands tucked deep into her coat pockets to hide their trembling. Benedict stood beside the stone, his face a mask of stone, though his amber eyes flickered toward her every few seconds, checking, grounding himself. Silas stood before the stone. He looked impossibly small against the backdrop of the towering quartz and the judging eyes of the council. He wore a ceremonial tunic of white fur, his dark hair brushed back. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a sacrifice. "The time has come," the elder woman intoned, her voice carrying over the wind. "The moonstone sleeps. Only the true Alpha's call can wake it. If it remains dark, the line of Farrowmere is broken." Sabine, standing near the front, smirked. She leaned over to Aldrich. "Get ready to challenge," she whispered loud enough for Benedict to hear. "The boy will fail before he even opens his mouth." Benedict's hands curled into fists at his sides, the leather of his gloves creaking. He looked ready to intervene, to stop the ritual and tear the throat out of anyone who dared mock his son. But Silas stepped forward. He didn't look at the council. He didn't look at the pack. He looked at Lorelai. She raised her hand to her heart and tapped it twice. "Believe." Silas took a deep breath. He reached into his pocket. The crowd murmured in confusion as he pulled out the small silver whistle. "A toy!" Aldrich shouted, his laughter booming. "The boy brings a toy to the solstice!" Lorelai's heart hammered against her ribs. "Trust him." Silas ignored the laughter. He closed his eyes. He raised the whistle to his lips. He blew. To Lorelai, there was only silence, a puff of breath, a slight tensing of the boy's jaw, but the reaction from the pack was instantaneous and violent. 500 wolves flinched simultaneously. Some covered their ears, others whined, dropping to their knees. Benedict's eyes widened, his pupils dilating as his head snapped toward the stone. The whistle was ultrasonic, high frequency, a sound so sharp, so piercing, and so perfectly pitched that human ears couldn't register it, but to the sensitive hearing of the wolves, it was a thunderclap. And the stone heard it too. It started as a hum, a vibration in the ground that Lorelai could feel through the soles of her boots, then a spark deep within the quartz. Silas didn't stop. He blew harder, his face reddening with the effort, pouring every ounce of his lung capacity into the silent scream. The spark grew. It flared into a beam of pure, blinding white light. The moonstone didn't just glow, it erupted. A pillar of luminescence shot straight up into the night sky, piercing the clouds and bathing the entire amphitheater in a light brighter than the full moon. The pack fell silent, their hands dropping from their ears, their eyes wide with terror and reverence. Silas lowered the whistle. He was panting. He looked at the glowing stone, then turned to the council. He raised his hands. "I do not howl at the moon," he signed, his movements crisp in the brilliant light. "I make the moon answer me." Lorelai felt a tear, hot and fast, slide down her freezing cheek. The elder woman stepped forward, her face bathed in the white light. She looked at the stone, which was still pulsing with the residual energy of the frequency. She looked at the boy she had called defective. "The stone has woken," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The loudest cry is the one we cannot hear." She knelt. One by one, the council members knelt. Benedict looked at his son, his expression breaking open. Pride, fierce and overwhelming, washed over him. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head to the boy. "Hail, Silas!" The king rumbled. "Hail Silas!" The pack roared back, the sound shaking the trees. Silas stood tall, the light reflecting in his gray eyes. He wasn't a runt anymore. He was a conductor of light. But in the shadows, Aldrich did not kneel. The celebration in the great hall was a riot of noise and heat. Barrels of ale were tapped, and the air was thick with the smell of roasting meat. The pack was drunk on the miracle they had witnessed, toasting the silent prince. Lorelai stood on the balcony, needing a moment of quiet. The cold air felt good against her flushed skin. "You taught him that," a deep voice said behind her. She turned. Benedict was there, holding 2 goblets of wine. He looked different tonight. Lighter. The weight of the crown seemed to have lifted, if only for a moment. "I just gave him the tool," Lorelai said, taking the goblet. "He was the one who figured out the frequency. He read about quartz resonance in the library while we were building towers." Benedict stepped closer until the tips of their boots touched. "You saved him. You saved my house." "He saved himself, Benedict." "No?" Benedict shook his head. "You saw him when no one else did. You gave him a voice." He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His thumb traced her lower lip. The heat coming off him was intoxicating. "Lorelai," he whispered, his eyes dropping to her mouth. The glass doors behind them shattered. Lorelai screamed as shards of glass sprayed across the balcony. Benedict spun around, shielding her with his body, a growl ripping from his chest. Inside the hall, chaos had erupted. Aldrich stood on the head table, a sword in his hand. Half the room, his loyalists, had drawn weapons. "Sorcery!" Aldrich bellowed. "A human trick! That was no true power. That was a whistle made by men." "Treason!" Benedict roared, his voice shaking the stone walls. He pushed Lorelai toward the edge of the balcony. "Run, get to the tower, lock the door." "I'm not leaving you. Go!" Benedict didn't wait. He shifted mid-jump, exploding into the massive black wolf before his paws hit the floorboards. He launched himself into the fray, tearing through a group of traitorous guards to get to Aldrich. Lorelai scrambled over the railing, dropping into the snow below. She didn't run to the tower. She ran to the nursery entrance, Silas. She found him in the corridor, backed against a tapestry by Sabine. The she-wolf was in human form, but her nails were long, curved talons. She was smiling. "Your daddy is busy," Sabine purred, "and your little whistle won't help you now." Silas was trembling, but he held his ground. He held a heavy brass candlestick in his hands. "Hey!" Lorelai shouted. Sabine turned, her smile widening. "Perfect. I was hoping I'd get to kill the pet myself." She lunged. Lorelai dodged, but not fast enough. Sabine's claws raked across her arm, tearing through the wool of her sweater and slicing skin. Lorelai gasped, stumbling back, the pain hot and sharp. Sabine prowled closer. "You ruined everything. We were supposed to rule, Aldrich and I." Lorelai backed up, her eyes scanning for a weapon. There was nothing but a vase. Sabine sprang. Clang! Sabine crumpled to the floor mid-leap, her eyes rolling back in her head. Silas stood behind her, the heavy brass candlestick vibrating in his hands. He had swung it with all his might, hitting her squarely at the base of the skull. Lorelai stared at him. Silas dropped the candlestick. He looked at Lorelai's bleeding arm, his eyes wide with horror. He ran to her, his small hands hovering over the wound. "Hurt," he signed, tears welling up. "I'm okay," Lorelai gasped, clutching her arm. You were amazing." A howl pierced the air, a sound of pure agony and rage. "Benedict." Lorelai grabbed Silas's hand. "We have to go to him." They ran back to the great hall. The fighting had stopped. The rebels were subdued, kneeling on the floor with guards standing over them. In the center of the room, the black wolf stood over Aldrich. Aldrich was beaten, bloody, but alive. Benedict shifted back. He was naked from the waist up, covered in scratches, his chest heaving. He looked wild, terrifying. He turned, his eyes scanning the room frantically. When he saw Lorelai and Silas standing in the doorway, the tension went out of his frame like water. He walked toward them. The pack parted like the Red Sea. He stopped in front of Lorelai. He looked at the blood soaking her sleeve. "Sabine?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Sleeping," Lorelai said breathlessly. She nodded toward the corridor. Silas handled it. Benedict looked down at his son. Silas stood tall, blood on his hands, not his own, but Sabine's. He looked up at his father and signed one fierce motion. "Pack." Benedict fell to his knees. He pulled both of them into his arms, burying his face in Lorelai's neck, his other arm crushing Silas to his chest. He was shaking. "It is over," Benedict promised into her skin. "It is over." 3 days later, the snow was white again, covering the stains of the uprising. Aldrich and Sabine had been banished, sent to the wastelands, a fate worse than death for a wolf. The council, humbled and shaken, had asked Silas to take his place at the head of the table. Lorelai sat in the library packing her bag. Her arm was bandaged, healing fast thanks to a salve the pack healer had given her. The door opened. Benedict walked in. "What are you doing?" he asked. "The job is done," Lorelai said, not looking at him. "Silas is accepted. You don't need a tutor anymore." "You think this was about a job?" Benedict crossed the room in 3 strides. He took the bag from her hands and dropped it on the floor. "You cannot leave," he said. "Why?" Lorelai challenged, looking up at him. "Because you're the king and you say so." "Because you are my mate," Benedict said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Lorelai's breath hitched. You didn't say anything." "I didn't know how," Benedict admitted. He took her hands, his thumbs running over her knuckles. "I thought I was broken too. Since my wife died, my wolf has been silent. I ruled, but I did not feel. Until you walked into that diner and offered my son a slice of pie." He stepped closer, his warmth wrapping around her. "You woke the stone for Silas," Benedict whispered, "but you woke the man in me. If you leave, the silence will return. And I do not think I can survive it again." Lorelai looked into his amber eyes. She saw the storm, the fire, and the deep, abiding love of a wolf who had finally found his home. "I don't know the protocols," she whispered. "I don't know how to be a queen." "You don't need to be a queen," Benedict said, lowering his head until their foreheads touched. "Just be Lorelai. That's enough. That's everything." He kissed her then. It wasn't gentle. It was possessive, desperate, a claiming that seared straight to her soul. Lorelai melted into him, wrapping her uninjured arm around his neck, pulling him closer. When they broke apart, breathless, a small clapping sound made them turn. Silas was standing in the doorway. He was grinning. He raised his hands. Finally, he signed. Benedict laughed, a rich, deep sound that filled the library. He reached out and pulled Silas into the hug, sandwiching the boy between them. "New rule," Benedict said, looking at his son and his mate. "From this day forward, no more silence in this house." Epilogue. The sound of home. 1 year later. The midnight griddle was closed, but the lights were on. It had been renovated. New booths, a fresh coat of paint, and a sign on the door that read "Private Event." Inside, the jukebox was playing old rock and roll. Lorelai flipped pancakes behind the counter, laughing as Silas tried to catch them on a plate. He missed, and the pancake landed on his head. Silas laughed. It was a raspy, rusty sound. He still didn't speak words, but his laughter had returned, a sound more precious than gold. Benedict sat in the corner booth, watching them. He wasn't wearing his crown or his armor. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, looking like any other father, except for the way the shadows seemed to bend around him in deference. The bell above the door jingled. A group of young wolves walked in, teenagers from the pack. They looked nervous. "Is it true?" one of them asked, looking at Silas. "Is the prince teaching the class tonight?" Silas wiped the pancake syrup from his forehead. He hopped onto the counter. He looked at the young wolves, then raised his hands. "Welcome," he signed. "Who wants to learn to speak without words?" Lorelai smiled, leaning her head on Benedict's shoulder as he came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "He's a good leader," Benedict murmured, kissing her temple. "He had a good teacher," Lorelai replied. Benedict turned her around. "I have a question." "Hmm?" He moved his hands. It was clumsy, stiff, and his large fingers struggled with the dexterity, but the meaning was clear. "Love," he signed. "You." Lorelai's heart soared. She kissed him, slow and sweet. "Love you too," she signed back against his chest. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the world in white. But inside, there was warmth, there was music, and there was the loud, chaotic, beautiful sound of a family that had found its voice. The story of Benedict, Lorelai, and Silas is a testament to the fact that power isn't always about the loudest roar. Sometimes it's about the quietest whisper, the smallest gesture, and the courage to listen when the rest of the world turns away. In a world governed by ancient laws and brute strength, a waitress and a mute boy rewrote the rules with nothing but their hands and their hearts. They proved that true leadership is about protection, inclusivity, and love, a love that transcends species, status, and sound. Enjoyed this story? If Lorelai and Benedict's romance melted your heart, or if Silas's bravery inspired you, please like this story and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe for more immersive tales of shifter romance, destined mates, and love that defies the odds. Let us know in the comments, what is your favorite sign from the story?